Welcome back, adventurers. Today we are going to be designing a fledgling town in Inkarnate. I'm going to walk you through my process, and the best part, we are using Inkarnate 100% free. This is just, I really do love this program, and they do it for so cheap, guys. I think it's like $4 if you really want to sign up for the monthly. Actually, here, let me show you. Yeah, $5 a month, and you get access to all of this stuff. This really sounds like I'm being promoted. I swear to you that I am not being promoted. I just really, really love this program, and I think they do some incredible stuff, and it gives you a lot of freedom. So, with all of that out of the way, let's create a new map. Let's do this one. Watercolor cities free. So, right away, you can see that I can actually add land. I'm adding it here, and you can see I have all these brushes to pick from. Right now, I'm doing terrain. So, I'm going to add all of this, and to make it a little faster, I'm just going to increase that. There we go. And so I've added all of this, and now what I can do is select a brush, go into the catalog. So if I wanted to add, and I do this all the time, make sure you've got the foreground selected, and then you can see you're actually painting. This looks a little off for the town size. So I'm going to decrease the size of this a little bit, go into the settings, and just make it a little smaller, and paint it back over. Let's talk a little bit about how towns form, right? And like, I want to start this off by telling you guys I am not a historian. I am not an expert on building towns. I'm not a city planner. I just love history, and I have a passion for creating things. And I have a passion for creating things that feel real, like they're rooted in reality and not only fantasy. So the first thing we want to think about is picking a location, right? Is this a spot that's near a river or a lake or some fertile land next to a volcano or something like that? Why did people decide to stop here? Now for this video, like I said, we're going to be doing a fledgling town, so it's going to be a small town, and I think if this video does well and you guys are interested in watching that and seeing my thought process, I'll do other videos in the future where we can see the actual growth of the town, and I'll expand on that same town and see how it might go from a small little stopping place, post, you know what I'm talking about, and see how it grows over time and turn it into a city with you guys. So first up, let's think of the location. So for this specific town, I think that would be interesting is to think of a place that was chosen for its defensibility, right? We live in a fantasy world, and there are all sorts of dark things, especially if you live in Maladea. So I'm gonna say that there is a very rare resource in a forest nearby, but you can see here's a bunch of the trees, and what I love about this is that you can choose to keep random stamps on or off, and you can actually see how it automatically moves to switch to a different stamp, which is really cool because you don't have to cycle through that. And if I don't want that and I want the same one over and over, I can turn that off. So I'm looking here because I see that there's a sort of a hill design here that's already been created, and I kind of like this because, as I said, I want to think of this as like a place that was chosen because of its defensibility. There's a forest nearby, it's got some rare amber. Let's just go with that. Almost like a gold rush or something like that, right? So maybe we put an inn. And already what I'm not liking is the repetition of the pattern here. So I'm just gonna go in, select one of these, maybe lower the opacity a little bit, lower the size, and just start kind of hitting some of these spots and just kind of breaking up that pattern a little bit. And in fact, you might even see a wearing down of the ground based on where people are trotting a lot, you know, so the grass might not be growing as full. Eventually, you know, people start showing up and bigger houses get built. You know, maybe the owner of the inn decides to build themselves a house next door because now they've settled down, and you see more buildings popping up, you know, and obviously as the buildings start to grow, you start to see more people settling down and homes actually appearing and creating sort of rows, right? You know, I'm trying to think if I came into a town and I was the first person, you know, one of the first people to be settling here, I'd want to put my building up somewhere where I know I'm going to have some room, some privacy. I don't know all of these people, so that's sort of my thought process. I could be wrong. What I want to do now is actually create some paths. So what I'm going to do is take this, I'm going to make this small, and I'm just going to paint a little bit more of this where people would have trotted the most, right? And around the buildings where land was cleared, there might be a little bit, but over time, you know, the grass starts to grow and things start to grow into the buildings. Man, people actually live there. So I'm going to continue the road up this way a little bit. And now what I can start to see is that this town is going to grow outward from here, right? And we'll talk about how. But These areas out here at the edges of the town probably are going to have more foliage, a little denser, because they haven't been touched yet. You might start to plop in some logs here and there just to show that things are being collected, that they've been felled, and that there's actual industry here where, you know, there's a need for the trees and the resource nearby. And, you know, honestly, you might even have just a collection of them. You know, like somebody's job was to haul them, and, you know, they've started collecting them there. Just trying to get a little bit into the psychology. But now what we're going to do is actually build from here. So, like I said, this was a place where a resource, right? There's a resource nearby, and this town has sort of sprung up because there's entrepreneurs here and adventurers looking for whatever this thing is, and people who see a possibility of turning it into an industry or into a business or some sort of venture. Or, likewise, they could be creating a venture or an industry or a business to supply something to the people, right? So, like, for example, you have these trees out here, you know there's a sap there that somebody out there is finding useful. Well, if there is a business-savvy person out there, for whatever reason, they can't or don't want to go into the wilds and look for that sap themselves, but they still want to make money, so what do? They come and settle down where these people are and start offering them supplies to help in their ventures. Axes, sap collectors, whatever the hell that is. Tools to help them go out there, you know, supplies, rations, butchers. You might even have guides that take people out from here and there, and, you know, because you might have a guide that sets up, and they're not, you know, always around, so they put up a building at the edge of town, you know, and everybody knows, like, oh, that's the guide, you know, and sort of builds a reputation for himself. You're like, oh, go look for the guy at the bottom of the hill. Then you want to start thinking about how are these people going to be sustaining themselves, right? They might start with a field, and realistically will probably have more than that. They'll have several fields nearby where people might purchase some land. I'm not a farmer. I'm not sure if this is accurate, but that looks like it'll sustain a town. I'd imagine, honestly, it's probably many, many times larger. So, right? And you don't have to show all of the land either. You know, I could do something like this just to show people, like, oh, there is farmland over here, and then you can say, you know, however many acres are appropriate. And, you know, maybe you have a house that pops up over here, the owners of this, and, you know, some sort of storage or something out there, right? And you can see that this is probably somebody wealthier because of the size of this building, and there is a storage or something out here. Honestly, this is just to kind of make it feel a little more lived in. So now you have people that are actually supplying. They have come here. They know that the people who are adventuring out here need food, so what do? They buy land and start to settle down, create some fields, and within a few years, they have something to bring to a market. But they're not the only ones thinking like that, right? Like I said, there's people who might be supplying axes for the trees and that sort of thing. So that's where you start thinking about, well, how many, you know, this person, you know, if they're a lumberjack, probably comes from humble means, so they set up shop, and you know, they get welcome to the town, and they start, you know, giving people general goods, and you have that here. Now, as far as those farmers, well, those farmers need somewhere to actually display their goods, so a sort of market starts to pop up, and let's see what they've got. I like this one. It feels kind of like a tent. You might have some stalls. Right? This looks like it's a little bit in the way. So let's move this building over here, actually. And you can see that now, as these buildings go up, now what you see is that a sort of, if we're assuming that all of these are tents or stalls or something like that, a little bit of a marketplace starts to develop, you know, something like that, right? And now you can see that there's actually a flow starting to happen, because as this need developed, people moved into these areas where they knew the traffic would be, you know, made deals with each other, like, this is my land, this is your land, contracts, other things, you know, to make sure, you know, obviously to protect each other, because these people aren't going to look for a problem with somebody they're about to spend the rest of their life probably around. So you can see how they start to think and develop a sort of a market center. And obviously I would use something more akin to these tents, something like that, and put those in to make it feel a little more, to just make it feel a little more realistic. But honestly, this does a great job, you know, especially if you're a DM on a budget, or, you know, your players don't care as much about all this stuff. Like, this already looks fantastic. A little bare down here, but we'll fix that. So you can see that, you know, now the farmers have a stall. The lumberjack that came here with supplies to help adventurers out there, now they have a stall. You know, you have the general goods here. You have the farmers who, you know, honestly, they're probably gonna have multiple stalls. You have the lumberjack who sets up their shop as well, right here. And then you have competitors coming, right? And they start setting up their place. And you have a stall for somebody who's actually got some livestock, you know, way out of town, and they bring them here, and you know, they bring the meat here. The point is, you know, you don't have to think super hard about it. What you do want to be thinking about is how the development of these stalls and how that sort of... I'm going to lock this in position. And that way I think I can stop selecting it. Yeah, that's much better. You know, you have the guide, and honestly, now that you have all the... You have a road kind of coming in and out of town, probably leads into the forest. You do start to set up a little bit of a stable, right? So maybe there's that, and this building that's sort of connected to it. Right, and you can see that I'm just trying to create a little variety by, you know, adding some buildings and sort of joining them, Legoing them together, and creating something different so that it doesn't all look like the same. But honestly, it doesn't matter. So you have a stable and a guide, and as people come into town, multiple vendors have set up shop. You know, they might live in one of these houses, they might be rooming together, but as the town starts to grow, more houses start to pop up. And now you have streets that are starting to form. You can see, you know, now you have sort of a little bit of a cul-de-sac that's starting to form here. And now that room is getting kind of tight, you start being very diligent with the way that you build new buildings. And now you can see a street that has formed here. So I might go in and just show a little more wearing of the town. This is the point where the town starts to get sort of big, right? You know, and you might remove some of these buildings. People might decide, oh, I don't want to live here anymore, and so they move, and maybe they go to the base where there's more access. This building gets torn down, and can now put up a bigger building right there, right? And then, you know, the innkeep that was here now builds a place over here. This place is now available for sale, and goes to become a tavern or something like that. And now you have a little more room for more buildings, and you can see another street form. And again, I just want to point out, guys, I have no idea if this is exactly how things would happen. I've watched a lot of history stuff, and, you know, there is a pattern to the way that things happen. And there's this one channel that I watched this video where the guy was talking about the history of San Francisco, and his whole channel was about maps and how actual cities get formed. And it was just really fascinating to see how San Francisco was built over time, from this very wide spread out town to becoming the San Francisco that we see today, because it's incredible how the different districts formed and the reasons for that and all that. And that's kind of what I like to put into my games, is just a little more thought, something to kind of to give reason to why they grow the way they do, because they don't just sprout up out of nothing. And you can see I'm tweaking things here and there, because based on what the building is, like this is a stable, I think it might be a little bit bigger than the other rest of the buildings here. I don't know, I've never ridden a horse. But, you know, then you have people probably within a few years just start to build and settle on the outskirts of this hill, because they want to be close to everything, you know, and so they start sprouting up around here. And, you know, then these people need their own storage area or a hunting shack or whatever it is that's going on over here. And then, you know, these people might become loggers, and they see industry here, so what do? Instead of hauling it all the way back to town, they start setting up these little places where they can work quietly, or somebody decides to move out there, and that sort of thing. The buildings start to appear in a sort of fashion, and now what happens is this main street that used to connect from this central area out now starts to get worn down and create sort of little road, smaller roads that aren't necessarily streets yet, but enough wear and tear from the wagons coming in and out that you start seeing something happen. And I'll turn the opacity down a little bit, make this a little bigger so that I can sort of hit this area a little wider, and just add a little, add some feathering to not make it so, yeah. So now again, the whole point for this town being chosen here was because of this hill and its defensibility, right? So what does that mean? That means that there was something in the area that made them feel the need to have a defense. What starts to happen is you start to see perhaps a town perimeter be built. Some walls start to go up. And, you know, stone might be something that they have access to around here, but realistically, it's probably going to be wood. This town has gone from being this outpost to a relatively small town. You know, it was a stopping place for specific adventurers who were looking for a particular item out here, and there were enough of them that drew them to this spot because somebody else decided this was a good spot to set up camp and never left, and put up a building and put up an inn for other adventurers, and, you know, maybe had a couple buildings here or there, and then other people decided to settle there as well. And ultimately what happened was that there were dozens, if not a few hundred people that saw the defensibility of this position, were fearful enough of the outside world or whatever is beyond, and started to settle down here and create their own food and take from the land around them and leave their mark, right? All of these little paths that have developed, and start to attract other people. And now you have a place that's probably a population of, you know, maybe a couple hundred people, 1,000 people, depending on how many families you can squeeze into these. And what happens is that as other people get drawn to this area, well, you have other buildings start to pop up and more houses, and especially homes along this spot right here, along the main road, where, you know, now the stable needs an extra hand, so they set up a place there. Homes start to pop up along this path, and maybe now people start to settle here. You know, so somebody tears down those two homes and puts up their new one. And then you have people who need access to the land beyond, and now, you know, you're having multiple places where gates are being created because you needed access to the farmland. These farmers, instead of using all, you know, going all the way around, or, you know, this way, now they have an access point back here, and a secondary road starts to get created. And now this town is attracting people from farther and farther away because other people have heard of this miracle sap, or whatever the hell it is. And so they start to settle here. Now you have to decide, is this a place that was untamed, and so there is no rule? Or perhaps it's within this untamed area of an empire, and now that this town has popped up, now the empire, their attention is on this town, and now they want to start collecting. So what do? They send somebody here that can run the place. They send a governor, or they send a lord, or somebody comes and takes over. We're going to say for this town that this is on the land of a local empire, and they drew a little too much attention to themselves, and now a lord is being sent to be established. And just down the hill, you start having to create a place for military training, right? So you set up multiple barracks to house your troops, and maybe a storage building, and then those troops need somewhere to live. So you have a sort of military district that pops up. So you have a checkpoint on the way in, and on the way in here, and perhaps over here as well. And now you have places for the soldiers to go to and actually do their jobs, because the Empire feels the need to protect this place now that they've realized how important whatever this sap is that the trees are producing is. And they want to protect it, and they want to protect their interests. So now that you have an empire involved, and you have somebody who's ruling it, who's ruling this area, now word starts to get out, and this town starts to boom, right? And remember that there's a lot of movement that happens, right? So this market that was here could start to become, you know, perhaps a little more permanent. And at this point, you know, of course, you would have blacksmiths and the general stores and workshops, Fletchers for hunting, places like that start to pop up, and they start to sell their goods and their services all around here. And this sort of market area that used to be just a bunch of tents now becomes a main street. And these tents that were here either get moved or removed. and make way for new buildings. You can see more of these streets that start to pop up, and you'd want the inn to be sort of a focal point, because that's a place where people can quickly gather and find rest and do what they need to. The innkeeper decided to move the building or rebuild, or something happened, right? Fires happen, attacks happen. If there's something dangerous enough that they need walls, there could very well have been an attack. Somebody broke through and set fire to some buildings and the inn burnt down, right? These are all things that you want to think about, because they add a sort of level of history to everything that's happening, and perhaps as the town is growing, more farmers start to settle down, and so you have a couple of homes pop up over here, and you have more evidence of farms out this way, which means they need more storage. And since the town is now attracting a lot of attention, more and more of these little streets start to pop up. And you have people with more money start building bigger houses, buying up larger portions of the land, to build themselves, a nice new life somewhere far away that wasn't exactly where they were. Now you want to think about the people that are coming here, right? Maybe there's a group of half-elves that were ostracized from a city that, this town decided, we're going to get rid of all half-elves, we don't want them here. They traveled super far to try and find somewhere for themselves, and along the road they discovered this place and the promise of a new industry, right? This new sap that they could get a hold of and maybe make something for themselves that was far away from the people that were looking down on them just for being half-elf or whatever, right? And so what happens is you have a community of people that shows up and decides they don't want to be away from everybody, but they want to stay with their own people, right? Because maybe they don't speak the language, or because they're just not ready, or they don't feel safe or whatever. And so now you have another district that pops up. And so this other street pops up from this caravan of, half-elf migrants or whatever. And, if I had access to other things, I'd be changing the colors and making them look a little different, because this group of houses will look different than the soldiers, and the soldiers may have more money, or they may not need the money, and this is standardized by the empire or whatever. But you can see how this is growing to become a little different. A noble lineage that settles here, and they buy a big piece of the land for themselves, and nobody can build on this area anymore because they own it all. This is all hilly, and it's all theirs, and they want that yard. But over here, where there is room, more and more people start showing up. So you have, this becomes an actual street at this point, where they're just trying to get as many people in, because the town is growing faster and faster and faster. And now this town went from being a little outpost with a brand new vision of taking these trees, and has become a growing town with actual structure, evidence of life out there beyond the walls, and a reason and a rhyme for everything that's happening here. Yeah, anyways, that's where my brain goes. You let me know in the comments if you are an expert in this stuff and you're a city planner or something, and if I'm way off, leave in the comments why I'm way off. Because I want to learn just as much. This is just where my brain goes, and honestly, for the average player, this is fine. This looks fine. You start throwing in things like some trees to make it look nicer, right? Because especially here, where maybe they don't want to look at these new neighbors that they just got, and they want separation, and you have maybe a little bit of a public area. Trees have started to sprout up at some of these edges, and people have let it happen because, it looks nice or whatever. But the idea is to just give it a touch of realism. And maybe this town becomes wealthy enough so that this noble's house becomes bigger. They start adding onto it. And now you have this crazy mansion that's up at the top of this hill. And now you see the beginnings of sort of a social structure, because now the person who lives here now demands power, because not only do they have the nicest house in the area, they're also at the top of the hill. And so what happens is, as people are moving in, these are the cheap places, right? Because this is where they can settle. This is the quick available land that they can get at a good price, and this is where they decide to settle. Right near the gate, lots of noise, lots of hustle and bustle. And as people are moving here, these buildings are getting upgraded as a sort of class structure starts to show up. You know, over time, these shacks get removed because they need more space up here, and they get moved down here where the original lumber stop was. And now these lumber workers out here now have a place to go to, and they have sort of a building. This becomes an actual shop, and now the town looks very different. And you probably have other random buildings out. Somebody who decides to come and live out here and doesn't want to be too far from the city, but they like their solitude. And so they set up a hunter's shack or something out here. And, maybe same thing happens out here. Now what you can see is that the wall has been placed. So a couple things have to happen. People have to let go of ego and, make room for new people, which means the local noble might pay for some of this land at a much higher price than what they paid for it. So they're willing to give it up. Or and I say that because real estate now becomes very expensive, right? There's not a lot of room, and if you want to put up a house, it's going to come at a price. Or the local empire starts to take these walls and expand them. Slowly, these walls either get moved or they become inner walls, right? Because you might have a secondary wall, a larger wall that starts to get built and extended outward, or a secondary ring, and this becomes the inner city, and all of these buildings, now the outer city, all of this stuff starts to get moved, and more buildings pop up here. And this inner city, as the real estate becomes more and more prime, these buildings start to get upgraded. And you might have a couple of buildings that get replaced by nicer looking ones. Maybe this becomes an officer's house or something like that. Or a big time officer moves here and says, I'll take up the position, but I want a bigger house. And so they build him this. Some of these houses get bigger, they get added on. Districts change a little bit, but now what happens is that they've gone through this process a little bit, and these buildings start to pop up a little more methodically, right? And now you have the beginnings of what could be slums, because this is all that they could afford, or a secondary neighborhood out here, a different district, right? Like, why did people move here all at once? Was it some sort of boom? Because people don't just show up in waves like that for no reason. Why did these people decide to all move here? And when they moved here, they decided to stay here together. Now you see the evolution of this town from this fledgling little outpost that was here for adventure and for something new, has become the beginnings of a small town. And this went from a few hundred people to several hundred, maybe a few thousand people that live here. If you multiply each of these buildings by 4, plus people who live out there. And now you have a town. Now you have this whole little fledgling town that was placed here for a specific reason, not just randomly, right? This hill was chosen for its defensibility. And I think I'm going to leave it there. I talked a lot, and I hope to speed through this. I'm hoping that it's not just another video of me rambling, but you guys seem to really like my map making video when I was using Inkarnate as an example with Photoshop, how I made my world map. So I figured, why not dive in and give it a shot here, and just give you guys a little bit of an inside look into how I design my maps and why I'm designing them that way. That's just my thoughts. If you design your town a little different, tell me why. Also, give me a name. Let's name this town so that I can change this from fledgling town to something much, much better. So maybe I'll put up a poll or something. There you have it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Forge on, my friends, and we'll see you next time, adventurers.